So, hi, um, my name's Rudy. I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and sovereignty has never been ceded here in Sydney, in Australia, really. I want to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any other First Nations mob here with us on the Zoom chat or in the room. I'm a Gamilaroi woman. My family are Toomeys from Pilliga, which is in northwest New South Wales, but I've grown up here in Sydney, a bit further south, so on Dharawal country. And I'm so pleased to be joining Veronica Gorrie here today. Hi, Ronnie.
Hi, Rudy. How are you?
Good, thanks. A bit nervous. I'm not used to having people in the room when I do these sorts of talks. So I'm pretending that everybody who is joining us is just a producer. They're taking their own notes and it's fine. So I'm going to properly introduce you, Ronnie, so you don't have to do it yourself. The day before Veronica Gorrie was medically discharged from the Queensland Police, she began writing down her memories. She didn't intend for it to become a memoir, but before too long, she had a book's worth of writing. Published by Scribe, Black and Blue chronicles Ronnie's life with humour and compassion. It stands in stark contrast to the brutality of the violence, institutional racism and sexism she has experienced. Miles Franklin Award-winning author Melissa Lukashenko likened Black and Blue to A.B. Facey's A Fortunate Life. Chelsea Wadigo, in her foreword, described it as not just a story of trauma, but also one of Black humanity. So welcome, Ronnie.
Thank you for having me.
Ronnie, I sort of alluded to it already, but you started writing your book in 2011, but it was not intended to be a book. What prompted you to start writing down your memories?
So throughout my career, I was subjected to a lot of bullying, sexism, and racism within the institution. And towards the end, I was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And as a result, I was just losing a lot of my memory. So I wanted to document what memory I did have, if not for myself, for my children and my grandchildren. And before too long, I had a book's worth of memories, and I'm so grateful that Scribe Publications was able to publish it.
And at what point did you start to think that this is something that could or even should be published?
When I realised I had enough for a book, so I was approached about it because it got out that I had enough material for a book. But also, I wanted my story documented because being Aboriginal and being a black fella, a lot of our history, we've had to dig deep and delve deep into the archives to get our history and to of past atrocities that have occurred to our peoples, and through massacres and genocide and dispossessions, the rapes and torture of Aboriginal women and children. And these are all in the archives, and I didn't want my children to have to go through that. So, and my grandchildren and generations after them, I wanted my story documented of the brutality and the racism that I was subjected to whilst I was in the police.
I'm kind of fascinated about, I guess, the way that we can position Black and Blue, because Amy McQuire has written about bearing witness, and in particular, the ways in which Black women bear witness. And as a Black woman who was part of the Queensland Police Force, you would have been somewhat uniquely positioned to see the ways the state uses its power. What influence do you think that had on how you approached telling your story?
Okay, so I wanted to tell my story because it's rare that we get a story from the inside out. Um, you know, where we've been given embargoes and, you know, codes of silence, and you know, it's one big boys club. We can't talk about what happens in there. So I wanted people to know what it's really like in there. And what the reader and the listeners now need to understand is, for anyone that's read my book, and there are a lot of traumatic parts that I've written about. If that's what I can remember, you can only imagine what I can't remember.
There's definitely a lot of very, it's a tough read. It's a read that I think you have also recommended people take quite slowly. But you have a particular way of kind of building breaks into your own story, and there is a lightness, there is a humor and humanity to your writing as well.
Yeah, and that's the way I am, really. I'm a nurturer. I think a lot of my people are. That's how we are. It's cultural, and plus I'm very funny. So I can't. I'm hilarious actually, but I do that on purpose so that it's not full on and give the reader a break. But I also tell people to take care while reading, because it can be full on, and it can trigger if you've been exposed to any of the stuff that I write about. It can be quite triggering.
So I have also been really interested in the ways in which Blackfellas tell stories, because when we share our memories around our mob, there are multiple different versions of the same event. Was there anything that you put into Black and Blue that you've since had family or community kind of, I don't know, show a different version?
No, everyone that I've written about, in particular my family, I've sought their permission before writing about them. And also like sharing my wealth, so to speak. Not that I've made a lot of money from writing this book, because we don't, as authors or writers, we don't make a lot of money. But any monies that I have been given, I've been sharing it with my family, because it's, as you know, it's my story, but it's more theirs as well. So
yeah. And in that, there's also kind of, you alluded a little bit earlier about talking to the archive. So there's our stories, but then there are sort of more official places where our stories live, whether it's the way in which anthropologists have gone into our communities and documented things about our family. I know that I can find out, if I wanted to, the size of my great-grandmother's head because it was measured. I know you've had some experiences of finding records of your family that you knew were untrue. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I've had to again dig deep into the archives to find out a lot of the family history, in particular my grandmother's story. She wasn't really open about it, and what she was exposed to, and what she you know, especially with stolen generation, how she was removed from her family and taken off the mission. And you know, first she was put on the mission, then taken off the mission and placed in Melbourne in an orphanage, and then, you know, just, you know, her and her 3 siblings, and 2 years later one of her siblings died, so she never saw her older sister ever again. And you know, my grandmother never spoke of this, but we always knew that she was stolen, but she didn't go into great depths about it. So it was left for me and my little brother, who's also quite interested in their history. He was helping, and you know, it's traumatizing reading language from the colonizers. It's quite racist, it's hurtful, it's traumatizing, and it's quite disgusting. And you know, when I first got my grandmother's archives, her ward files, I couldn't sleep for days. was quite upsetting.
When you're not working through it, but when you are doing that kind of research, what do you do to prepare yourself or to care for yourself afterwards?
Not much really. Not much at all. I don't have a. I've got well, when I was in the police, I developed an OCD, and mine was pinoclean. So the pinoclean comes out, and yeah, so I don't really practice self-care. And you know, if you're telling the blackfellow to practice self-care, within the last week alone, we've had 2 Aboriginal deaths in custody. Like, we'd be like practicing self-care every fucking day. You know what I mean? Like, you know, this whole country is a crime scene since colonisation. We've had genocide, massacres, dispossession, and so on. You know, we've had our land stolen from us. We've had loss of language. My people were tied up to trees and flogged if they spoke their language. Yeah, so it's self-care. Like, we don't, you know, how do we self-care? How do we look after ourselves other than sharing information with our family? But I also, in saying that, I had to be quite careful. My father's got dementia, and you know, and it's upsetting. And when my book was published, he was the first one to read my book, and because he's got dementia, he's forgotten a lot of the stuff that's happened, and it was quite traumatizing for me to watch my father coming in and out of his room visibly upset. You know, and my story isn't unique. The only part that's unique is that I've written about it. And I want the listener and the audience to know that my Black and Blue is just my story. It's not every other Black woman's story. And my experiences are mine alone. And not all Black men are violent and abusive. I've got an amazing father, and I've raised an amazing son who's a beautiful, you know, beautiful man. So
I'm just going to remind you all, we are going to have time for questions at the end. Think of your questions as we go. But Ronnie, I wanted to circle back around to bearing witness, and I guess the work of people like Dr. Chelsea Wadago and sociolinguistic Associate Professor Diana Eads have written about the way that Aboriginal people, the way we communicate kind of sets us up as being unreliable witnesses, whether it's because of swearing, whether it's because of body language, whether it's because there is an inherent distrust from the system against the stories that we are telling, often because they are stories that are questioning the power of the system. What do you think? What level of being a Black woman in the meant that you were able to see through that as a cop? Because you show, you've written in Black and Blue about times where you were able to kind of diffuse situations in, I guess, unexpected ways.
I don't know. So what I'm getting from that is that when Black women or Black people, when we speak up and call out racism, we're deemed to be angry. Yeah, and we're not good witnesses. We're not good victims. And also, whilst I was in the police, I had no friends in the job. They're not used to working with Aboriginal people. They're used to locking us up. So I found that quite difficult, that aspect of it. Yeah, and just, I don't know what else to say in relation to that. But yeah, whenever we do speak up, we're deemed to be angry, and it's not the case. I'm a very compassionate person. I'm very empathetic. I'm a nurturer by nature, you know. But I speak up and I call it out every time, and I think that's where it went wrong with me. And I just from my knowledge, that, you know, blackfellas that are still employed by police don't speak up and speak out.
So I also, your memoir stands in really stark contrast to a type of storytelling that we find in crime of propaganda. So it's those, it is storytelling that is glorifying the justice system. And it's, look, I'm going to say I watch a lot of, watch a lot of police procedurals. I think a lot of people do. But what would you hope people who are writing and reading crime could think about?
Oh, look, what you see on TV is not real. It's fabricated for one. You don't see what happens within a real police station. How when they employ Aboriginal people, we're just a tokenistic black person in the systemic and institutional racist sector. And we know when we're employed that we're not wanted. They're just fulfilling their Can I just have a break for a sec?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that.
No need to apologise.
Okay, yeah, so I'll just go on. Whilst I was in a place, I witnessed a lot of brutality towards my people. I've witnessed black men being handcuffed and booted in the mouth and teeth flying out. I've witnessed a lot of racial remarks made against my people, and to sit within the first few minutes of working with someone who didn't know that I was Aboriginal, I'd have to tell them that I was Aboriginal, and I don't know any other workplace whereby you have to do that.
Ronnie, I thought I'd give you would take a different tact for a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you've been learning your language, and I wanted to ask you about what prompted that and how you've been learning.
So I've been learning my language because I have grandchildren now, and I want to teach them my language, or their language essentially, and it's a revival of our language. Yeah, so that's why I've been learning my language, and I speak language to my grannies, which is really good. Yeah.
So you've been learning Gunai, Kurnai. I know you've also written, I think it was a play that used Gunai, Kurnai.
Yeah, I did a play. Sorry.
Oh, well, how do you approach writing in language that is maybe feeling different to writing in English?
Oh, for me, it's empowering to be able to write in my language, and to see an Aboriginal actor reading out my language on stage. It's the most powerful thing I've ever seen, and it was good that night with the Melbourne Theatre Company. I had my whole family there. Sorry, it's the old saying, we move in tribes. Well, I had my whole mob there, so it was really, really good.
I know I've started learning in the last couple of years, and it was a very interesting experience of going to TAFE and sitting in a classroom learning Gamilaroi with other mob, which was nice, and my mum, who was the naughty kid. Where were you learning? How were you learning?
So we've got a language centre here in Melbourne. I'm not in Melbourne. I live on country, but yeah. So I went there and they've got a language book, Gunai Kurnai words, and I just went there and printed it all out. And in my book, I do utilise language, and that's language words that I've grown up with. I've always known. Yeah, but yeah, I've had to learn more.
Coming back to Black and Blue, there is a particular writing style that you have that's very stark and not particularly descriptive, if that makes sense. And I think you've spoken previously about that coming from having written a lot of police reports. Do you want to expand on that for us?
Yeah, so I'm not a writer. I am now, but the only form of writing that I do know is for police reports. They're called summary of facts, and these summary of facts are produced in court as evidence. So that's the only form that I know how to write. So that's how I've written a book. Yeah, and clearly I don't have filters, which my kids are embarrassed about. But that's the only way I know how to write.
Did you find it to be a cathartic process to be using this style?
I've been asked that question a lot. No, it's actually been quite triggering for me when I do speak about it. That's pretty much why I've had to pause a couple of minutes ago. Yeah, so I've been on podcasts, and prior to being on podcasts speaking about Black and Blue, they'll ask me, is there anything in particular you don't want to speak about? And I'll tell that person, and then they'll bring that up during the podcast, and I find that triggering for me. And I feel like I've been put on the spot to answer that, but yeah.
There was a point at which you had finished the book, and then there was, I guess, because the book was under contract, there were things that you were not allowed to talk about. Like, how does that impact your relationship to the book? Because this is effectively, these are your memories and your stories, and having periods of time where you're not allowed to discuss publicly something that is yours.
Yeah, so especially being on social media, and the only socials I'm on is Twitter, and on there I don't have any filters. So there was an embargo. I couldn't speak about anything that was in the book. I didn't want to give away too much. I wanted people to buy the book, but also leaving the police. I was given, I was told to be quiet about stuff that happens in the police, and for confidentiality purposes as well, I couldn't mention too much. So there's a lot in the book that I haven't put in there that I do remember, but obviously for confidentiality purposes, I haven't put in there.
Ronnie, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't gone near yet?
Not really. Does anyone have any questions in the room?
I'm happy to start opening up to questions. So I'll get you to take off your mask, ask your question, and I will repeat it for the people on Zoom who can't hear quite as well. So the question is, do you see any hope for blackfellas who are working within the white system of the police?
No, I don't. It was designed by white people for white people. It's not for us. That's all I have to say on that.
Ronnie, the question from the room was, after your book was published, did anyone from Queensland Police reach out to offer any support?
No one's reached out to me. I've had a police officer from New Zealand, from the UK, a former Aboriginal police officer from New South Wales, a current copper from the ACT, but no one from Queensland Police, and not even the ones who I thought were my mates, but workmates only, that is.
You've had a lot of support from blackfellas and your community, our community. How valuable has that been in having published?
We celebrate each other, which is pretty deadly. That's how we are culturally. Like, if one wins, we all win. You hurt one, you hurt us all. So it's really good. Like even getting Chelsea and Melissa to endorse my book was, I'm so grateful for their endorsements actually.
I think there was another question. Yeah. Oh, Ronnie, why did you join the police in the first place?
Very good question. Growing up, even as young as 5 years old, so I witnessed a lot of police brutality towards my family members, but also growing up as an Aboriginal child, I was so frightened of police. And I wanted to break that cycle with my children. So much so that when I was at the academy, I used to take them there on the weekends so that they would see that police were just as normal as you and I. But I didn't want my kids to fear police the way I did when I was a child. Whenever we mucked up, when I was a child, I was threatened with police and welfare. And even with my grandparents' generation, they all threatened with police and welfare as well. So I just wanted to break that cycle of fear. But I only haven't been in the police for only a short time. I realised that these fears were well and truly justified.
So, Ronnie, the question from the room was, what was your experience of publishing like, particularly keeping in mind the fact that a lot of Australian publishing is quite white, and there's a hope in this room that it was not quite as antagonistic as being the publishing industry not being quite as antagonistic as the police.
My publishers were wonderful. The only thing I didn't want to translate my language, my words, but it was their suggestion that I have an index, a translation for my words at the back of the book. That was the only thing, if anything. But other than that, it was pretty smooth and quite respectful, and I'm grateful for them to publish my book.
How long did the publishing process, the editing process take?
Well, from the time I started writing to the book to the day it was published, it took almost 10 years in the making. But the editing, probably about 9 months, I reckon. It's quite a lengthy period, and it's quite daunting. And if you've never done it before, if it's your first book, it's quite daunting. And yeah, but so I was approached by this publisher because they'd found out that I'd written enough for a book, and they were interested enough for me to send my manuscript, which I did. And that period took like up to 3 months, and just it's quite overwhelming and daunting. But when I got the offer of the book deal, I was so happy because I wanted people to read my story, and I wanted it documented so that my children and grandchildren and generations after that don't have to dig into the archives.
Who were some of the writers that I guess have been of particular influence in this process for you?
Oh, there's been heaps. The main writer has been my daughter, Veronica Gorrie. They write for television and essay writing, and so but I follow a lot of black writers, Maxine Beneba Clark, Mr. Lukashenko, Dr. Chelsea Wattago, her latest book, Another Day in the Colony, probably one of the best books I've ever read. So my interest is in black writers.
You talked a little about this earlier, but was there any stories that you wanted to check with your family ahead of time before publishing?
There was the I don't know if anyone has. Can you just get a couple of hands up? Has anyone in the room read my book yet?
Has anybody read the book yet? Hands up. No, I think you got one hand from me, and
I don't want to give away too much, but
Okay.
an incident that occurred with my sister was quite hard to bring up, and you know, I did have her permission, but she was like, after reading it, she's been quite triggered about it. For anyone in the room who do read it, just take care when you're reading, take breaks when needed. It's full on. I think chapter 2 we start getting right into it, but and it's quite confronting, and it's, I guess what you'll get out of it is that how one Black woman can put up with so much trauma in one lifetime and still come out. And I'm optimistic. I'm a positive person usually. Yeah, so just be mindful. Just it's full on, and I hope you buy my book. I hope you read it. Yeah, because it's a story worth reading.
We're getting a lot of nods about plans to read. So, was there any more questions from the room? Yeah. Can you tell us about what reader reactions you have been getting?
I've actually, sorry. So with my mob, I felt like when the moment they've started reading, I've been nurturing them right throughout the book. You know, and they've been texting me, and I've been checking on their welfare. Yeah, and just a lot of actually just this week it's made Australian book reviews most memorable book of the year. One of the I think they had 50 books for the year, and one Black and Blues made that list. Yeah, so thrilled about that. But also just know that it's not a happy story, and you don't always have to have happy endings. And I wish there was a happy ending. And maybe, I don't know, the reader will determine whether there was or not. You know, I think my happy ending was me getting out of the police. Yeah, and surviving.
I mean, given that it was a memoir, how did you know you had reached the point that you wanted to finish? You know, like, how did you know that this is the end of my story for now?
I actually didn't know, and I was probably like my publisher's worst nightmare, because as they all like editing, more memories were coming up, and I kept sending them like pages and pages of memories, and yeah, it got, you know, it got through, and then I couldn't remember anymore. So, but yeah, so I think that was the, like, I don't know if that's the normal process. It's my first book, but that's how it was for me. I just kept sending more material for the book, and things like being in police. I have witnessed a lot of traumatic incidences, and so things will trigger memories for me. And I won't give away too much because you haven't read the book, but you know, like an extension cord, for example, gives me a trigger. Certain smells will give me triggers. Certain vehicles will give me a trigger. Yeah, so
thinking about, because obviously you've not stopped writing, you have continued, but why the shift from memoir to playwriting?
Oh, I wanted to tell my grandmother's story and utilize a lot of my language, which was good. So that was, I'm grateful for that opportunity as well. But I do still write. I've got an ongoing opinion piece with The Guardian. I think this next week, maybe, I've got a piece coming out with The Age. But after the book, and after being triggered, after doing all the writers' festivals and that, and getting up and speaking, and being so overwhelmed, I did face, had a writer's block for about 6 months, but I'm back now. So I've had me little break, and off I go again. So yeah, so I continue to write, and the next book I want to write is a children's book. Yeah.
Do you find that there is I don't know, more of a willingness to for people to access language when it's when it's being spoken as opposed to when it's on the page? Because you mentioned that your publishers wanted you to translate the language, the Gunai words, but you would never actually be translating if it was a play.
That's right. And I think with the play, I think the way the actors portrayed the language and the way it was spoken, I believe the audience got the gist of what it was about. But when you're reading, I think there's a difference, so it's probably harder for the reader to work out what the words mean. But I just felt like I didn't want to translate, but they know best, and so I just followed their lead.
So if you had the power to change 3 things about the police force, what would they be? That's a question from the audience.
Oh, look, well, firstly, I'm an abolitionist now, so I don't think we should have a place. I think we should be helping each other in the community. With Aboriginal people, the first responders in relation to anything that happens to us are our family anyway. We call our family before we call police, and which is why blackfellas are like deadliest problem solvers, because we do it every day within our family structures. And also with my people, we have cultural law as well. So, and we still practice it without you fellas even knowing. We still practice it every day. And yes, there are punitive measures within our cultural law. But in regards to your question, 3 things, I have no answer for that. There's probably 100 things I could probably change, if not thousands. I have no faith in the police system at all. I guess I just want the audience to know that prior to me becoming a police officer, I was in a family violence situation, in a violent relationship, and whenever I called police, my children were taken from me, and which is another reason why I wanted to become a police officer as well, is because of my life experience and my life, my lived experiences. I thought I would make a really good police officer because I'd been through most of the jobs that I attended. As a victim, I understood what the victims were going through.
Chelsea Wadigo has been writing, and I think she talks about it in Another Day in the Colony as well, about, sorry, I'm going to swear, fuck hope. And that hope is, I'm going to misquote her and it'll be bad, but that hope is a tool to keep us kind of on the string, And I wonder what you think about that, Ronnie.
Yeah, hope is something that it's not achievable for blackfellas. You know, it's like they keep moving the goalposts on us. So I'll just talk about something I've put up on Twitter today. Nothing to do with my book, but I'll just give an example of what I've been going through lately. So I've put my house on the market for personal reasons, and I'm looking for a rental. And the owner of the rental through the real estate requested that they see photographs of the interior of my house before they made a decision whether to rent it to me or not. And because the photos wasn't prepared in time, because they wanted to see if this native was clean, because it wasn't prepared for them in time, I was denied the application. And this is what we go through each and every day. And so, and it's expected that when I apply for homes, when I apply for jobs, we expect not to get it, you know. When we do get the jobs, we have to work 10 times harder than the other white person, you know. And that's how it was with me being a police officer. I had the highest arrest rate for a female in my district, and that was because I had to work harder, 10 times harder than the other coppers, just to prove and justify my existence within the racist institution.
Sorry, people on Zoom also have the opportunity to ask questions. I should have said that earlier. So if you're streaming, feel free to write them in the comments.
How many people in the room?
Oh, you tested my maths here under pressure. Hang on.
Just roughly.
About 25.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for coming today. Much appreciated. And apologies for my language. I have no filters.
Have you started writing the children's book you mentioned, or this is a plan you have?
I have. I've got another quick story. I'm full of them. Just this week on Monday, my daughter was out. It's not my story to share, but I'm going to. But I just want people to get an understanding of what it's like for us. My daughter had a fall and was unconscious at night on the road in the gutter, and people drove past my daughter without rendering assistance because they're Aboriginal. And had it not been for someone, and it turns out it was my daughter's friend who was riding her bike home from work and was just checking up on the welfare of this person, not knowing it was their friend, I'd hate to imagine what would have happened to my daughter.
So the question is about, you've gone from memoir to playwriting to children's books, and it's been said that children's books are the hardest. What has been your experience?
Oh, I definitely agree with that, but yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I've pretty much written it. I'm just in the editing process, but yeah, it is the hardest to write a children's book, especially if you're given, like, depending on the age specifics. Like mine's going to be directed for 6 to 12-year-olds, but yeah, it's quite hard to tap into their language, like, yeah, that they can understand. Yeah, so you've got to not dumb it down, but just utilize words and be careful with what you write as well.
There's a particular, this is weirdly something I know about. There is a particular skill because it's not just the language level, it's also the number of pages you're going to use, because they have to picture books in particular, but like books for children, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
maths involved, more than you would think. Well, I think, Ronnie, thank you so much. I think we are done.
I think we're sort of out of time. Thank you so much, Ronnie, for joining us, and thank you for sharing a lot of pain and a lot of anger, and rightfully so. And we look forward to seeing that children's book. And the thing about children's books also, I think, I don't know if you'd agree, is that you have to be at the right conceptual level. You have to have ideas. You have to put ideas that are complicated in a simple way and in simple language and in not too many pages. So really good luck with that one.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for being with us. I think we'll all, you'll probably hear the applause if we manage it, because we try.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to Rudy for doing a wonderful job. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye-bye.